everybody to this latest edition of Talking Naturally with NHSN. I'm Professor Annie Tindley and I'm a trustee of NHSN, and I'm delighted to be talking today to Michael Turner. Michael, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, Annie, and thank you for welcoming to your beautiful office. I'm Michael Turner. I'm also a trustee of the Natural History Society. I've been a trustee for about 20 years, but I remember the society since about 1997.
Wonderful.
Yes.
And so what are your particular interests in natural history and your work with this society?
My interest for natural history are based around birds predominantly, although I do have a general interest in all aspects of natural history, especially the history of natural history. And that has led to lots of collecting of books on natural history. So with the Natural History Society, I'm quite involved with the library, and helping assist with that.
Brilliant. And so how did you first get into natural history yourself? Was it as a young person? Or?
It was, I was very young, and ahead of this I've been trying to work that out because I'm often asked that. This goes back to the early 70s. I can't remember when it started, but I do remember watching a chap on a documentary, and it was the Royal National Institute Christmas lectures, and he was talking about the wildlife of Borneo, and I remember being mesmerised. So that was 1971. I had been interested beforehand, and in fact I'd started to, I was going to say, write a few books, copy ladybird books and drawings. So yes, and that chap was called Attenborough. I don't know what happened to him.
I think he just disappeared.
I think he disappeared. So there was that. I've always been interested in exploration and naturalists. I don't know where the birds came from. I'm always asked about the birds. I do have a few early memories of that, trying to see where it came from, but I don't know how it started. There's no father figure or grandfather figure I was interested in. It's just I'm the first in the family that's
had this interest.
And again, I don't know where it came from. I did find, come through my desk at home, my membership card for the Young Ornithologists Club. And that was in 1973. And my first, and a lot of bird, as I relate to this, your first ever bird book, which the Observer's Book of Birds, which I've still got. It's well thumbed. It's kept together with various amounts. A book binders will cringe with various amounts of sellotape and plastic, but it has thumbprints in of friends who's tried to grab it. It's got people's names in and that. But I will. It's priceless to me. I wouldn't part with that.
I'm sure.
It's a wonderful thing. So that's as far back as I can remember where the interest came from. I'm not sure where the spark was. That's right.
And then when you grew up, was there a lot of opportunity to actually get out in and observe?
I was brought up a few hundred yards from Saltwell Park in Gateshead. So I used to go down there with a little camera. And I remember in the winter, there was a huge pipe that ran into the Dean. There's a large Dean. And I remember sitting in the pipe, having thrown seed out, photographing these, they're not terrible photographs, because it was a manual camera. Blackbirds and dunnocks and wrens that were going down. So yes, the park, it's an old park from the 19th century, so it's a lot of woodland. And I suppose in the early days that's where I honed my skills for studying birds. So I'm still involved with Saltwell Park now, years later. So it's always meant something to me. It gave a lot to me. So I was one of the founder members of a friends group there, and I'm still involved with the friends to a degree. So it meant a lot. So I'm trying to give a bit back.
It's interesting, isn't it, that even in what you might think of as quite an urban area like Gateshead, there is like pockets of nature, and
it's a very green borough. It's a very green part, especially when you get out to the outer reaches of Lamesley and stuff like that. But this green lung of Saltwell Park, I think, and especially now, especially just after the pandemic, means a lot to people. So I'm still doing guided walks there on birds, and the birds are really interesting. I've recorded birds there for about 25 years.
Right. Okay.
So I do that for bird tracking in the webs, the wetland bird count. So there's a big 4-week lake there,
Yeah.
and I've got some old archive records for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have one record for there, and it's because it was old Gateshead Council, or Gateshead Borough, where rooks were a problem with the Golden Green.
Oh,
So somebody was dispatched with a shotgun
right.
to remove the rooks, and I have the archive of that. Thankfully, they're not bothered.
They're not doing it now.
They're not doing it now. So yes, it does mean a lot, and that's where, as I said, that's where I honed my skills.
Yeah, and then so because obviously now, of course, you do guided walks. You're a trustee for the learned societies. So how did you get from sort of the Ladybird books and just doing it yourself to the sort of expert that you are today?
Well, I'm not sure about expert. A friend once said to me, "I'll give you the definition of expert. X is an unknown quantity, and a spurt is just a drip under pressure." So yes, I'll take it as a compliment, but I know what you mean. Yeah. So it's just evolved. So the passion for nature has never went. So as I'm getting older, but you bring up a family, and you just develop that from the interests, and then of course as you start to care about biodiversity, the planet, and stuff like that. And now I'm more in the sort of trying to pass on that passion. So I have great joy now when I'm guided walks off. I'm teaching at forest schools, especially the youngsters, because they're just like sponges.
Yeah.
And I do a thing with, I'm trying to build a cabinet of natural curiosities. So it's a collection of fossils and insects and all types of things, copies of footprints of badgers and badger skulls, and encourage them to touch. Not don't touch, please touch.
Lovely.
So it's passing that message on, and if it sparks something in youngsters, job done for me.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
And so how for you then, how does your passion for nature and birds and education link to your passion for books?
Thankfully it works well, yeah, because obviously, the subjects are well covered.
Yeah.
Yeah. The book thing, again, I don't know. I remember Ladybird books. Only a year ago, I found a set of Ladybird books in a bookshop, and I went and bought them again. Not checking that I already had them, but we don't need to talk about that.
No, that's
yeah. And it was nice to see, and I could see why the inspiration came from garden birds of moorland, and these fantastic drawings. I was often attracted to the illustrations of the books. Yeah. So I used to draw quite a bit. I haven't drawn for a while, but when I got the Observers Book of Birds, as well as being a sort of information given, these illustrations by Archibald Thorburn, who's my favourite bird artist, who's a Scottish artist, who died in 1935. He did illustrations for Lord Lidford in his bird book, and then they were used for the Observers Book. And I was just drawn to these illustrations and would copy those when I wrote my books at the age of 8 or 9, which I still have, by the way. Good. Stapled together with these very bad drawings and the life of the other set and stuff like that. So when it came round to putting a book together, the book I'm about to have published on the history of birds of the Derwent, I went straight back to Thorburn.
Right.
So I've used local artists and local illustrators, photographers, but as a little bit of self-indulgence, I thought I want Thorburn's illustrations there. So we've sorted out some copyright issues, and hopefully in the spring when it's published, So it's come full circle from enjoying those illustrations as a kid in the Observers Book to now using them in my book.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they enhance the book.
Yeah. And so if you, it sounds like that was a huge influence on you, but have there been any other books that have had a big influence on you and you're thinking about the natural world and natural history, or any other favourites that you if you had a desert island discs moment?
Well, again, because you're talking about bibliophile, you know, I'll narrow it down to the first 200.
Yeah.
There's a book with an awful title but a great content called the Shell Bird Book. So it was done by the Shell Oil Company.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And it's an awful title, but the content is fantastic. And it's this eclectic mix of, it's by James Fisher, done in about 1967. So it's the history of ornithology, it's habitats, it's his futuristic look at conservation, the art of natural history, poetry of natural history.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that question. I thought, if I'm stuck on that desert island,
yeah,
that is the book I would take. Yeah.
Yeah. You'd probably be busy looking at the birds on the desert island as well, but yeah, you might want to break and look at the shell.
For variety, that would be my choice. That would be my choice.
Really?
Yeah. I could take another 10, but in the style of desert island discs will not be greedy. No,
but that's good. And so you've sort of really, in an amazing way, married your passions for the natural world and birds with your passion for books.
Yeah.
And do you think that I think about the collections of the society. So it's for you, is that a big part of the work of NHSN? Is a
massive part. I've always thought we've got several assets there. We've got the reserve, which is fantastic, and what's going on there now. We've got archives, we've got the collection, but the library as well.
Yeah.
And I know people will go to digital references and digital research, but it's that going into this place of learning and understanding and see what our forebears have found and written down and drawn. And I think that gives inspiration. When I've been volunteering in the library and I see students come in and that they're looking at the works of naturalists that's gone before them, and that gives inspiration. I think it's a really important part of society. And now you're saying you're about to publish your own book. Can you say a bit more about that book that's coming out? It's a history of birds in the Derwent Valley. This started off a few years ago. There was a book called Birds of the Derwent Valley from 1896, written by Thomas Robson. And I found a copy online, and it was £595 or something like that. It was Amazon. You had to buy it from America, and I thought, no way.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I happened to be in a bookshop in Newcastle. The chap there knew I was after it, and he says he had sold it months earlier. So can't do much about that.
Yeah.
I'd visited this particular Saturday, and I said cheerio, and I was walking down the street. He ran after me, and he says he found the book. He hadn't sold it. It had fell down the back of the bookshelf. So we agreed on a price, and I bought that. And you wouldn't give it as a book. It's only about 90 pages or something like that, but you wouldn't give it a second look. Red cloth bound, hardly any title left on it. But that, again, that's priceless to me, because it's where I live now in the Derwent Valley. It's where I'm writing about it, where I do guided walks. So I got this book, and I was reading that book in lots of footnotes. It's a great insight into natural history of the day, but also a social history. And there was this one footnote, and he was thanking other ornithologists and gamekeepers who sent him information.
Yeah.
And he offered his thanks to a Thomas Robson. So I thought, just a second, you're Thomas Robson. So I thought, who's this other Thomas Robson? And that sparked something. And there was a Thomas Robson had recorded the first great reed warbler in the UK in 1847 in Saltwell in Gateshead. So I'd read some research on this, and the wrong Thomas Robson got attributed with the records. Somebody had just seen the name and thought, and that had held historically.
That mistake is
that mistake. So I remember it started off with an A4 sheet of paper, and I thought, Thomas Robson, I'll write that down. 2 years later, I had a dossier like that, and I researched his family, I researched him, his workings. He had this ailment, and his doctor at the time advised that he goes to warmer climes for his. So they sent him off to Turkey. I metaphorically chased him to Turkey, and I wrote to Istanbul University to try and get some records, but he started to discover birds there.
Right.
And they were sent back in, and he made his money from collectors. So he sent back them to the Natural History Museum in London, and he made his money from collectors there. So he dealt with agents, and I started to get transcripts and manuscripts, and this thing grew. So in 2013, I published his biography through the Natural History Society, and again, that's come full circle, and that's now been reprinted in the new book, with some other documentation of other ornithologists, and then I've added some chapters. So it's evolved, this book. It started off with a few pages, and then went and went. So the book I'm publishing, I hope folk find interesting, but it seems to put the record right about Thomas Robson. And it was a joy to work with local people who literally live around the corner, who are photographing birds, and an artist who paints the birds in the valley. And the book will be illustrated with that. So
that's brilliant. It's interesting, isn't it, that it's almost impossible to write a natural history without it being a social history at the same time. And
it is, because there is some uncomfortable reading in it, because obviously our forebears, without binoculars and telescopes, had to shoot everything. And there's a corncrake, which are such a rarity now, and just really only seen in northwest Scotland. Corncrake were in the valley. Corncrake were recorded in the Tyne Valley in Gateshead. But I've got a manuscript of the Robson I wrote about, and he was sort of about sitting in his little cottage, and he thought he'd take the dogs out with a gun, and he joyfully recorded that he killed a pair of corncrake. The dogs were still yapping away when he went home, so he went back out and he found the rest of the family of corncrake and finished them off. So it's fascinating, the social side of it, and the social history, but uncomfortable reading from a naturalist's point of view,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And so going back to the Derwent Valley, if we can, so is the Derwent Valley, obviously you live there now, but so is that a particularly special place for you?
It is. The funny thing is, when I lived near Saltwell Park, I wasn't involved with the park then. I moved to the Derwent Valley. When I lived in Gateshead, I was a countryside volunteer in the Derwent. And then I moved to the Derwent.
And now you're.
And then I got involved. So I didn't get that quite right, but it's all settled now. So I'm still involved with the park, but I do quite a bit. I'm a trustee at the Land of Wokinine, which is a brand that we use, a brand that's used by Groundwork, and that encourages visitors to the valley and education in the valley. So it is a big part of me. I literally live across to the country park, so I'm out every day. So I'm getting a good perspective of birds and natural history, which was really prominent during the pandemic. And I'd seen some weird things, because I did meet hours walk as recommended. But small mammals running across the footpath, things I've never seen before. And what everybody else commented on, and I'm sure you're aware, the loudness of bird song.
When all the traffic noise.
So I feel blessed living there. I know people were visiting there during the pandemic, and it meant a lot for the well-being. And it's a stunning place, and I live there, but it's my go-to place, and I'm looking forward to the spring when all the African warblers and migrants return. So I'm doing some bird walks to show about warblers and that. So it is quite special, as well as the deer, badgers, and otter and stuff like that. So yes, I'm a little bit biased, but
that's, you're allowed to be biased. And you mentioned there about seeing some strange things during the pandemic, but if you took a longer term perspective, what are the big changes that you've seen from when you started off exploring natural history yourself in the park with your ladybird books to now? What would be
one thing, species wise, is the starling, because I remember as a young boy, there's an island on Saltwell Park Lake, and I would visit there at sunset, because the island became a roost for starlings. So it's landscaped, the island, so it was a shape of trees, which was all familiar to everybody. But when you had 10 to 15,000, maybe 20,000 starling arriving, and the murmuration above the lake, I was mesmerised. But when they landed on the island sank, and the trees moved.
Under the weight of the
yeah, so the whole outline and the landscape of the island as the island went down.
Wow.
And it's one of the things I'll always remember this repeated. That doesn't happen anymore with the decline of the starling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, is it all like, is that what your main observation would be over that time scale, that decline, or is there like room for optimism in any area?
There's always room for optimism, especially now, I think, with younger generation becoming aware of the planet, or more aware of the planet, and the problems of biodiversity, and some of the data that's coming out, especially even local farmland birds, but the general data that we're losing so many percentages, and the percentages are always high. 90% of this species, 80% of this species. And that's not just birds. It's all the cuddly things are always highlighted, and the things invertebrates often overlooked. So we need to be mindful about the whole picture.
The whole ecosystem.
The whole ecosystem. It's so important, and I think young people now are starting to embrace that. And if I'm doing a little part of that through forest schools and teaching young 4- and 5-year-olds, that if that inspires them and they remember something like that.
I was going to say your work doing working with young children, doing the walks, getting people out there seems to be I class that as my classroom. Out there's my classroom. I'm often asked to do talks and all that, but I don't do that. I deliver everything outdoors, and I think people get a sense of that. And if they're taking in information about the natural world, it's great. If they're enjoying the mindfulness of being in an open field, under trees, I get nice comments like that. That's a positive as well. And I suppose one of the big changes over the past few decades is we've become a lot less of an outside society. We're much more sedentary. We're inside a lot of the time, stuck on the screens. But so it's that it feels like a radical act to get people out, doesn't it? Now, and kind of actually immerse themselves.
It's had a boost with the pandemic when things started to clear a bit. A lot of more people wanted to be outdoors. There was a lot of uncomfortableness, as you know, about being in a lecture theatre or a classroom. So it's something I've struck a chord with me, and it's worked. Getting people out there. I do a guided walk between Christmas and New Year, and it's always fully booked. Really? Because people have had enough of TV, they've had enough of turkey, they've had enough of sitting in the house. I want to be out there. And that's a great motivation, and they always want attended. Well, long may it continue.
Well, thank you so much. We're running out of time, but that's been absolutely fascinating.
You're very welcome.
So much, Michael. That's been brilliant. We'll have to do a part 2 soon.
Yes. Thanks very much.
No, thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.